Hollywood AJ, back with another episode of the one and only Keep It 100 YouTube channel. Now, I'm going to cut right to the chase. You guys know after every UFC pay-per-view, I do a recap of the card or the night's biggest fights. I do it on the Monday after every fight night. But, of course, we had the Super Bowl. I had to get my thoughts and takes on that. So I figured, you know what? I better wait on my UFC 271 recaps. But not only that, there was a lot of controversy surrounding this main event because there's certain opinions that people have that, of course, you think your opinion's right at all times. However, I needed to rewatch the main event again to truly give you guys my honest take on what happened and if there's any controversy at all. So that's where I'm going to start with the main event. Robert Whitaker versus Israel Adesanya, their rematch from UFC 243 back in October of 2019. And there was a lot of questions that were going to be answered. What type of fight will Robert Whitaker fight this time around? Will Israel Adesanya get bored like he did in his past title defense, like he did against Marvin Vettori? Because it is a guy he already beat. Is he going to be as motivated to go out there and do the same work that he did before? And we got those questions answered. If you guys know that I did my predictions, and if you haven't seen my predictions, go ahead and subscribe to watch all my predictions for all past pay-per-view events. But in my predictions for this fight, I pictured, honestly, Robert Whitaker to fight the same fight, to really pressure Israel, to try and wrestle him a lot more, and just be in Israel Adesanya's face from bell to bell. And I thought with that game plan being predicated, that Israel would have an easier chance of knocking out Robert Whitaker, similar to how Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo, and similar to how Stipe Miocic knocked out Fabricio Verdum. Now, that fight didn't present itself. A lot of people knew Robert is going to have to wrestle if he wants this fight to go into the later rounds. And Israel Adesanya is accustomed to wrestling. He's accustomed to being on his back. He lost a fight by being on his back. This guy's seen it all, been through it all. But what I'm about to tell you guys, I'm not truly biased against Israel. I love Israel Adesanya. He is one of my all-time favorite fighters. He is definitely in the top 10 of my all-time favorite fighters of yesterday and today. So the first round happened, and Israel definitely won. He outclassed him. He used his range. He used his kicks. He used everything we're accustomed to seeing. He landed up dropping Robert Whitaker with the same, not the same punch, but with the straight left hand. And we all thought, oh man, here we go again. It's the beginning of the end. Israel defends his title once again, but this time probably in even more devastating fashion than the one previous. So honestly, I thought the exact same thing. And I thought Israel was just going to have his way with Robert once again. Round two, though, was a different story. Israel kind of leaned. Israel's a counter fighter. I'm not going to say he waited because he's a counter fighter. That's his fighting style. But Robert wasn't taking the fight like we expected him to. He landed a good takedown. He landed very good punches in that second round. And I just simply thought that, hey, with that takedown, even though he didn't control him, I thought Robert took that round. I felt like Israel didn't do enough. I felt like Robert landed the bigger punches in that round. So after 2 rounds, I have it 1-1 for both men. Round 3 comes, and Robert has the most emphatic takedown of the fight so far. He takes down Israel and somewhat backpacks him for about 30 seconds. And I want to say 30, about 10 seconds. Therefore, again, not much action going on. Robert's initiating it. But I feel like in the build-up to this fight, like I was saying, is that Robert's just going to have to be a dog, be in his face. Similar to what Kelvin Gastelum did, even though that's the style that knocked him out. But it would have been in a more measured approach like this one was. Now, I gave round 3 to Robert Whitaker as well. I just don't feel like Israel did enough to win that third round because he just landed kicks, and all the kicks that he landed were blocked, and all the punches that he threw were either blocked or evaded well by Robert Whitaker. So round 3, definitely I gave to Robert as well, 2-1 Robert. Round 4, another takedown. Robert had a takedown in the rest of the 4 rounds that he had. And more on those takedowns later. He had a takedown. He backpacked Israel Adesanya for another 30 seconds and even almost sunk in a rear naked choke. Imagine how crazy that was. But like a champion he was, like Israel is, he stood calm. He kept his composure and knew he's going to get out of it no matter what. And he did. So again, round 4 was probably the closest round of the fight, but you can make a strong argument that Robert Whitaker won rounds 2 through 5. And I don't see how Israel... I honestly don't see how Israel won. Now, this is where I'm getting to my main point. You look at fights like Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, both of those fights. You look at Brandon Moreno versus Davis Figueiredo, both fights. Both fights. All 3 fights, for example. And you look at Jon Jones versus Dominic Reyes. What do all those fights have in common? A lot of controversy. A lot of controversy means a lot of people are going to give their opinions, and you're going to have to go back and watch the fight 2, 3, 4 more times to truly see if your opinion was right or if you're swindled in any way to go in the situation and go in the direction of the judges. With this fight, I compare it to Dominic Reyes and Jon Jones. Dominic Reyes, in my mind, won 1 through 3 in that fight, and Jon Jones supposedly won the last 2 simply off of takedowns. That did not happen. And all of a sudden, we have the same thing that happened this past Saturday, because Israel Adesanya got taken down by Robert Whitaker. Now, Robert Whitaker didn't control those takedowns, but at the end of the day, they were still takedowns. And takedowns count as grappling, aggression, and octagon control, which is in the rule book. It's in the rule book. Israel fought Yoel Romero in March of 2020, and he won that fight off of leg kicks. I think he definitely threw less than 50 punches. He won off of leg kicks. And this goes into the judging. These judges aren't going to understand what a leg kick is, because they are going off of the 10-point must scoring system used in boxing. And a lot of these judges that do boxing also do MMA, also do UFC. And this is where this has me absolutely befuddled, because how can you give Alexander Volkanovski a title fight win if he threw more leg kicks than punches? Truly something crazy to see. And how can you give Alexander Volkanovski the title when Max Holloway clearly won rounds 1 through 3, and Alexander only landed takedowns in the final 2 rounds and wasn't able to do much after that? It's a topic I will talk about until I'm blue in the face, and it's a topic that I don't understand. I don't understand how a champion can win off of just pure takedowns, off of pure leg kicks, and how a challenger can win off of pure takedowns, and somehow the champion still wins. It goes back to that old adage. To beat the champ, you got to beat the champ. And what good is it beating the champ if you do everything in your power? I'm not saying that Robert did everything in his power. There's a lot more he could have done. He could have followed up a lot of his combinations with the right hand. He could have followed up a lot of his combinations with the high kick. He could have followed up a lot of his combinations with just simple more pressure. And that didn't happen. So I guess I can understand why Israel won. And I could understand why he won in the sense that he threw so much more punches, even though they were blocked, even though they were evaded, even though they didn't do much damage, even though they didn't drop Robert Whitaker at all in the latter part of that fight. So you can make the argument Robert won 4-1. I think so, because if takedowns mean as much for the champions, they should mean as much for the challengers. It just should. And enough to beat the champ, you got to beat the champ. If you go by the rule book, Robert Whitaker won. But they were very close rounds. Robert Whitaker didn't dominate that fight. No, not at all. I feel that Israel Adesanya definitely kind of took it safe, played it safe, and wasn't landing enough punches like he needed to. Wasn't the boxer that we're accustomed to seeing. So you can make the argument Israel did win, but I just felt like his output was not enough to win the fight. And Robert landed the bigger punches, landed the takedowns, and in the past fights I've seen, and the past fights I presented to you, although they didn't win, in my eyes, those challengers should have beaten the champions. And again, I'm not biased towards Israel Adesanya. He's one of my all-time favorite fighters of all time, and I will watch him any day of the week, and I will watch all of his fights. I just felt Robert won 4-1, if not 3-2. I just don't see how you can give it for Israel. Now, as far as who's next for both men, I'd say Sean Strickland should be next for Robert Whitaker, even though Robert Whitaker goes on a tear no matter who he fights. I feel like if Sean is in the upper echelon of the division, give him a former champ and give him one of the best guys in the division, because it is clear Israel Adesanya and Robert Whitaker are miles ahead of the rest of the division. But you had Jared Cannonier fight Derek Brunson in a fight that was a true number one contender fight. It was an amazing finish. One of the most brutal finishes I've ever seen. I thought Derek Brunson won that first round, and Derek Brunson fights like a Khabib, but Derek Brunson doesn't really go for takedowns as much as Khabib does. And Derek Brunson looked a little frustrated in that second round before he got knocked out, and he just wasn't himself. He wasn't on that 5-fight win streak, Derek Brunson. He wasn't that blonde Brunson like we're used to seeing. And Jared Cannonier used it to his advantage, and Jared Cannonier is a guy you do not bet against. When all the chips are down and when all the chips are against him, he finds a way to win. And boy, did he. Landing an elbow in the clinch, then a backhand. You never see anyone land a backhand in the UFC. And if you do, it's rare, and it's going to be played on that person's highlight reel until their career is done. Lands a backhand, then gets Derek Brunson on the ground and just throws 3 vicious elbows, bouncing Derek Brunson's head off the canvas like a ball. Truly something violent to see. Israel Adesanya talks about fresh meat, wants to fight in June. I'm sure Jared Cannonier has no problem. They could fight this next weekend. It's a shot at the title. You know that man is not going to pass it up. And Dana White even said, I'm not saying no to Jared Cannonier. So I think that's the next fight to make for both men, both for Jared Cannonier and Israel Adesanya. And I believe Robert Whitaker should fight Sean Strickland. Let's talk about the heavyweight fight. Derrick Lewis versus Tai Tuivasa. This was a big fight for Tai Tuivasa in the sense that he hasn't really won the big fights. He has won all the fights that he should win, and he did win the fights that did put him in the upper echelon of the division, in the top 15. He did deserve that number 11 on his next to his name. But he hasn't beat anyone in the top 5, let alone the top 7. And Derrick Lewis was definitely a good test for him. He was a knockout king. He has the most knockouts in all weight classes in UFC history. I mean, Derrick Lewis is down to bang. And if he misses even a punch, you're going to be hurt and you're going to be doing the chicken dance. And I'm sure everyone bet their parlays and bet their fight statistics, or however you bet. I'm sure they bet that no matter what, every person knew this fight was not going the distance, and it didn't. One round, okay, that's what happens. Derrick Lewis took Tai down, landed some good punches. It was kind of a filling out round, but I like the way Tai fought. You can never be all the way outside against Derrick Lewis, and you have to either be all the way outside against Derrick Lewis, or you either have to be all the way in against Derrick Lewis. You can never be in the middle, because that's how you get knocked out. Just ask Chris Daukaus. Just ask Alexander Volkov. Just ask Travis Brown. Just ask Alexei Oleinik. Ask Curtis Blades. So Tai fought a smart fight, either all the way in and all the way out. But when it was in the middle, Tai proved he was down to stand and bang, and boy, did he. In the replay, when Tai finished him, in real time when Tai finished Derrick with a vicious elbow, everyone was loving elbows that night. I mean, from Jared Cannonier to Tai Tuivasa, elbow knockouts were the choice of finish for almost every fighter, it felt like. So when he knocked out Derrick in real time, I was just like, okay. It seems like Derrick wanted out, because Derrick was getting caught. Tai hurt him before he finished him, and it seemed like Derrick wanted out. And I just thought, you know what? It's his hometown. The pressure's getting to him. He just doesn't want to be in there anymore. But when I look at the replay and Tai lands that thing flush, he was out. All the lights were out in Houston, and boy, Houston, did we have a problem. Tai Tuivasa is a bona fide contender in the heavyweight division, and those weren't words I was prepared to speak to you guys when I'm making this video. Great win. I love both of those guys. I was happy if Tai won. I was happy if Derrick won. They're just two amazing guys, and in a way, you were rooting for both of them. I don't know who's going to fight Tai next. You know, there's a lot of contenders. I say Chris Daukaus is a good step up in competition for him, even though he does have a date with someone. It's going to be tough. It's going to be interesting to see who they're going to match him up with. And as far as who they're going to match him up with, I don't really know who. I really don't. So I'm just going to have to play it by ear And you best believe when the news is here that his opponent is standing across from him on whatever date and whatever venue it is, I'll be one of the first to break that news.